All right. Hello, everybody. I am Carlos. Nice to meet you, everyone. I am a full stack developer in Starknet. I have been building in Starknet since 2021. And since the early days of Starknet, Cairo Zero, I'm from Latin America, currently based in Asia. And I am a contributor to many open source projects in Web3, like Foundry, Uniswap, Scaffold ETH, Scaffold-Stark, etc. And currently I'm becoming a founder, so I'm building my own project. And language work, and you can reach out to me in English, or also Spanish and Chinese. And the Twitter is JR Carlos 2000. So I have JR Carlos 2000 and also Twitter, the same. In today's session, and thanks a lot to Tung and David for inviting me to do the workshop today. I think it's a pleasure to be here teaching people and folks how to use Scaffold-Stark and how to build apps on a Starknet. The session topics for today are, we're going to go through first a very quick recap of Starknet libraries. I will briefly explain what is Starknet JS, what is Starknet React. Then we will move into talking about Scaffold-Stark. And then we will do a hands-on developing some apps, one app on a Scaffold-Stark on top of what you guys have been working on in the last week. And then we can have a 10-minute break and then go for a quiz. And then we just keep going until maybe we can deploy to mainnet and launch something on mainnet. So
hey, Carlos,
let's get started.
Sorry to interrupt. I think
yes.
someone can hear your voice really clearly. Maybe adjust a little bit your mic,
okay.
or like increase a little bit the voice.
Or let me change my headphones. Okay, great.
Thank you.
So, all right. Just starting. So what do we need to get an app live on a Starknet or in many blockchains, right? We need two things. Usually we need a smart contract. That's the core of our app. And then we also need the app, the client side. So we need something that users can interact with. And usually this is done, through a web app, can be also like a mobile app. So today we're going to be focusing on this part, which is building the app. I think in the previous sessions, you already know how a Starknet works, how to build the smart contracts, what is Cairo, and also how to do testing. So in this session, we will be figuring out how we can actually build something that the users can interact with, and you can just show your apps to friends. So let's see, Starknet libraries. So Starknet libraries, very simple. They are pieces of code that allows us to interact with the network. So there is a lot of libraries out there. I'm just going to mention the ones that I have used previously. So there is a Starknet in Rust, there is a Starknet Python, and a Starknet JS. So Starknet in Rust, it's mostly used to build some infrastructure, as I have seen. For example, Dojo uses Starknet in Rust, and Starknet Python has been used mostly on doing like machine learning, AI. And then the session of today is related to Starknet JS. So Starknet JS is, I would say, the most used library of a Starknet in the ecosystem with the highest amount of downloads. And then Starknet JS is basically allowing us to use JavaScript to connect to the network and do some interactions. And then we move into a Starknet frontend. So a Starknet frontend, I just place it like this. So we have on the left side, we have a Starknet JS. In the middle, we have a Starknet React. And on the right, we have a Scaffold-Stark. So I'm going to go one by one. A Starknet JS first. So Starknet JS is basically a bunch of classes and utilities that allows us to connect with the Starknet network. So instead of sending like raw calls with JSON RPC calls, we will be able to, for example, declare and initialize an account and interact with JavaScript lines of code with the Starknet network. Likewise for a smart contract. So we can declare a contract using an ABI, an address, and then call those functions, right? And at the same time, we have utilities. So utilities, for example, as you might have seen, Starknet has some new types, like for example, big ints. U256. So you have to be able to convert certain types from JavaScript to the ones that Cairo will receive. So it's more like converting into structs. and more like validation of addresses. These things happen in utilities. So again, Starknet JS is basically this set of tools, and it's a library that allows us to connect with the Starknet network. Now, Starknet JS, we can definitely do a front end with the Starknet JS. I mean, we can just launch something simple with React, and we just add Starknet JS, and we can do some buttons, we can do interactions with the network. So we can also do front end with the Starknet JS, but it might be very hard. So then we move into the next one, Starknet React. Starknet React is for those who are familiar with, let's say, WACME in Ethereum, if you have tried that before. Or if you haven't, basically Starknet React is a wrapper of Starknet JS that creates some hooks that are very useful for us to place them into our React app. So for example, these hooks, the most important ones are the read contract, the send transaction, the use account, and the use connect. So what we need in the app, usually we need the user to connect, so use connect. Then we need to read data from the smart contracts from the blockchain, and we use read contract. And then we need to send transactions. So for that, we will use this one. And use account will give us information about our accounts and many more. So here are the docs. Let me just click those docs. We can go here. So this is these are the docs of a Starknet React. There's a lot of utilities and helpers. All these you can take a look later. How do these utilities work? And then moving back. So the last one in this row is Scaffold-Stark. So as you might have seen already, Scaffold-Stark is like at the end. So Scaffold-Stark is a wrapper on top of a Starknet React and a Starknet JS. So it uses a lot of like the code from a Starknet React to make it more easy for developers to launch apps. And also basically it's like a framework that allows us to do fast development on a Starknet. So Scaffold-Stark is inspired in a Scaffold ETH. So it's brought to life by Build Guild members and the Starknet open source contributors last year. And you can take a look at the website. So Scaffold-Stark is in scaffold-stark.com. This website, we're able to see how we can start our project with Scaffold-Stark. For example, you can just do npx create a start at latest, and you will be able to spin up your own project from scratch. Also, we have a bunch of tools here. For example, we have the docs, so we can go and check out the docs and see what things you can do with the Scaffold-Stark. For example, you have custom components that are built like address. It shows your Starknet ID. We have the Stark inputs. We have some recipes on how to integrate, for example, cartridge controller into Scaffold-Stark, how to do different things using a Scaffold-Stark. Also, something very cool that we have is the contribution, of course, and upgrade a scaffold. So this is an upgrade a tool that we have in which, because a scaffold is like developing always on development. So we might want to upgrade our version that we have before. So for example, there is a new version coming in a few weeks, and we might want to upgrade it. So we can just choose 2 versions here, and then it will show you how to upgrade. So like what changes we need to do on the framework. In the last changes, I mean, the last versions, there has been, between this version 1 has been a lot of changes. So yeah, you can expect a lot of lines of code to change. But this is a great tool also. Then another thing we have in the website on the Scaffold-Stark is Learn. So this is very important. Learn is this website. It's Speedrun Stark. Also, it's very similar to Speedrun Ethereum. It has a different layout. It has a bunch of challenges that you guys can work on. So you have to connect your wallet. Think of it as an app, as Stark links for apps. So you go there, connect your wallet, and you submit your challenge. And you have to submit deploy URL, which is like your app. You have to submit your contracts and the GitHub URL. And what this is going to do in the background is going to go and check that your deploy URL, which means your app is working on Sepolia, and that your contracts are deployed, and you will be able to pass these challenges. So we have quite a bunch of people that have submitted these challenges, and it's really a good way to learn a scaffold, because these challenges go from very simple ones, like this challenge is just how to set it up. You can follow along and set up your whole scaffold project, and then moving into more complicated things, like for example, a staking token vendor, and then finally building a DEX. Now we are going to be launching 2 more challenges, and I think are going to be the last 2 challenges. They will be building a multi-sig, which will teach you the magic of account abstraction in a Starknet. So that's being done right now by the team. And then we are also, I think, doing the 1 more challenge. I forgot the name, but there's 1 more challenge coming as well after that. And yeah, this is the speedrun. Speedrun is, again, is like the Stark links for Scaffold for frontend. And then there's a demo and the GitHub. So let's go for the GitHub. Okay, I think let's go back to the slides. Okay, now, as I mentioned before, Scaffold-Stark is made out of Starknet React, Starknet JS also, and it also has these special packages that include Cairo and a Starknet Foundry as well. So it's like a monorepo that has everything you need to launch apps, which is the smart contracts and also the front end. And it's what you have been working on in the past few weeks. And here on the right side, I have like a comparison or like equivalence chart graph that I have here. So if we go from top to bottom, we have Ethereum and Starknet. For those who are familiar with Ethereum or EVM, we have RPCs, we have VM and Starknet JS. So those are like equivalent in a sense. And then we have Starknet React and WalkMe, which provide hooks to connect. Now, the equivalence is really it's really strong. So there is a lot of, like, for example, use send transaction, these specific names and the way they work, they are very similar. So because this is inspired in this library from Ethereum. And then there is a Scaffold-Stark and a Scaffold-ETH. So it's the same. There is a very strong equivalence there. Then why do we actually need Scaffold-Stark? So we need a Scaffold-Stark for hackathons and to launch MVPs fast. So sometimes, I mean, this is from a personal experience, and it's like an advice for everyone. I think in Web3, there is a lot of things changing fast, especially in infrastructure, in tooling. So sometimes when we want to launch a project fast for people to test, let's say we have an idea and we want to ship something fast that we can get feedback on, right, from our friends or investors or something, we need to launch something fast. And I have faced previously in many different scenarios, I have faced something that I don't like, which is the clash of different versions. So many times I'm using a specific version and suddenly I change into, let's say, Starknet JS version, and I use a different RPC version, and it doesn't work. So we made this with the objective that we give you a tool that works out of the box if you have the versions of the tools that we specify in the framework. And we're very I think we are very serious with this, because previously we have a bunch of contributors that want to add more extensions directly into the main monorepo, but these extensions are not reliable, probably. So we just keep them aside. So we try to keep what is the most reliable inside the monorepo so that it works out of the box. So this is one reason why you want to use a scaffold. Another reason is just probably, I wouldn't say probably better DevX, but sometimes it's just more friendly for you to interact with. So since we launched a scaffold, we have seen in many hackathons and in hacker houses, I have seen many projects and teams using this, which is the debug page. Probably you guys have already used it in the previous sessions. So the debug page allows you to interact with your smart contracts on localhost if you're deploying on localhost with a more user-friendly way, right? And in this one is like the old way we used to do. I think many still do it. I think I still do it sometimes. Is using a Starknet cast and send him a bunch of raw data, which is very hard to read sometimes. I mean, as a beginner or someone who is learning how to develop on a Starknet, probably this is a more friendly way to start. And then we go into Scaffold-Stark hooks. So Scaffold-Stark hooks are very similar to Scaffold ETH hooks, and they are wrappers on a Starknet React. For example, we have this Scaffold read contract, write contract. We have special hooks that Starknet React doesn't have. For example, the multi-write contract and the event history. So we build this by ourselves. So what these hooks actually do, most of them, they will be very type safe. So for example, you are developing your smart contracts and then you want to reference one, you can reference them by their names. So if your smart contract is called counter and you made you're trying to use the right contract, you will just reference the counter name, and then it will give you some options for the functions. And you can just choose those functions. It's going to check that the types that you're passing there are also correct. And then when you switch into, when you switch the network, it's going to automatically switch for you the whole thing. So it's very, it's a very cool thing to have to move fast when developing. And then let's do a hands-on on a Scaffold-Stark. I think what we will do, okay, this is not what we're gonna do from the counter. So I think I prepared this repo here. You guys can check it out. It's jrcarlos2000/hello xyz. What I did is from the last session that you guys finished the last week, I added some placeholder components, HTML code, and then I also changed the contract a bit. So we can start from there and build some hooks with the scaffold. Sutun, how should I share this?
Yeah, I shared in the chat already.
Okay, great. Okay, let's go. So I have my terminals here. So I'm gonna just pull this here. By the way, Rick is also here. Rick is is right now the core contributor of the Scaffold-Stark. He's been more involved in the last few weeks. And then yeah, he's definitely the person to reach out to on Discord later if you have any questions. Thanks, Rick, for making it. Okay. So I'm opening my code. Okay. So I have on the left side, I have some terminals. I'm gonna use to run a few things. So let me first go through how this is composed, this repo. This is a mono repo. I don't know if the font size is okay. Is that okay? Sutun?
Maybe a little bit bigger.
Here?
Yeah.
Here is better.
Better.
Here?
Yes.
Okay. The other is to be. Okay, so this is a mono repo. We have two packages. So there is the Next.js package and also the Starknet Foundry package. The Next.js package basically contains our client, our app, and the Starknet Foundry package has the contracts. I think you guys have been working on this previously. And the only way these two interact is when you deploy contracts. So when you run a deploy on your Starknet Foundry package, it's going to send a bunch of artifacts to the Next.js package that you can use on your front end. So that is the only way they talk to each other. Otherwise, they're independent. So you can do 1,000 tests here, and they are not going to affect your app in here. Okay, so let's check out the Starknet Foundry section.
Carlos.
So the Starknet Foundry.
Sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. Can you increase the font a little bit more?
Okay.
Yeah, and then one student is asking whether they should clone this repo and work from there for this session. Can you maybe explain a little bit more?
That's a good question. Actually, you can clone it, work from there. It's the same versions as before, but if you don't want to clone it, just copy this file, the page tsx file, this file, and the contract counter, the counter contract file. Or just clone it. It's the same versions as the previous one. Okay. So the packages, right? We have the packages here. These are the smart contracts packages. So we have, I think this shouldn't be here. Anyway, we have this here. I think this is using a previous version. We remove local devnet as a dependency. But in general, we have the contracts and the deployment scripts. These two things are the most important ones that we're going to be changing, and the EMV example. Now, if you're developing on localhost, you don't need to touch this because this is only, it's already set up for you to work on localhost by default. However, if you want to build on mainnet or Sepolia, you will need to have these private keys and account address here. Now, if any of you already has a private key, an account with the Stark tokens in mainnet, I suggest you guys can start looking for your private key and setting this up. So later we can deploy our app to mainnet, right? And then this one we just change here to mainnet. I will share in a while more a bit about that. And the two important files we care here about is contracts. So we have our counter contract. We develop our contracts here. We can create more contracts and we just put them in the lib so we can compile them. And then we will be able to deploy them here, the deploy TS. So scripts TS, deploy TS, here is where you will deploy your contracts in this function, the deployment script here. And this is how you deploy them. You will pass a bunch of constructor arguments as a struct with different keys and values. And you can reference. You can also like override the contract name of your contract. So for example, let's say you have a token and you want to deploy multiple instances of the same token with different names. So you will be able to do this with this specific function. So you can deploy USDC, USDT, and DAI with like just one single source. And yeah, this is the most important file. So whenever you change, let's say your constructor arguments, you will have to update this part as well. Okay, so this counter I already changed before this session, just a while ago. What we have here is a new counter. What I did is we will increase the counter until it reaches a wing number, and the wing number is a constant here, which is 10. So we increase the counter until we reach 10, and the last person who reaches 10 is going to receive any funds any Stark tokens that this contract has. And then we can send Stark tokens anytime. I will send some. And if you want to, I added another function, which is the reset counter. When you want to reset the counter, you will have to send to the contract as many Stark tokens as it has. So it's like a small game. There might be some issues here. I just did it earlier for the sake of showing how it works. And yeah, basically that is the changes I did from the previous version of the smart contract that you guys have. Okay, so the next thing to do is I'm going to explain the Next.js part. So again, this is a Starknet Foundry part. We can do many things. Let me put these workings. Is the font okay of my terminal? Is it okay, the font
Yes.
of the terminal?
Yes.
Okay. So Okay, we are here in the terminal. It's in a Starknet Foundry. We can do multiple things, like for example, yarn deploy. We can run that. If you want to deploy to DevNet, you can do yarn deploy -- network Sepolia if you want to launch in Sepolia, or mainnet if you do mainnet. Okay, but first of all, let's just yarn install, and let's go through what the Next.js package is about. So the Next.js package is our app, and it has a bunch of hooks. So you can take a look here. If you go to hooks and Scaffold-Stark, you will see all the hooks that we have. Some of them are custom. We made them, I think, the use scaffold event history. We made them with the Starknet JS directly. And the others are, most of them are wrappers on top of Starknet React. Okay, so this, if you want to take a look how these hooks work, you might want to take a look at this section here. Now, the most important file in the project, in the whole mono repo, is this one. It's a scaffold config. The scaffold config will basically set the network in which your app is going to run. So for example, I can be in DevNet, I can be in Sepolia, or I can be in mainnet. So whenever we do this change, the whole app will change, because this is using a context that is built with the Starknet React, and it's going to tell the app that everything that is under the hood, it's just happening on this network. So if you are launching smart contracts on localhost and you change this to Sepolia, those smart contracts doesn't exist on Sepolia. It's going to tell you that it's wrong. So the types will be failing. And here we go to the next part, which is the contracts part. So the Next.js part has a contracts. And then why do we have contracts here if we already have them in Foundry, right? These contracts are more artifacts. So again, when we are interacting with contracts, we need a few things. We need the ABI and the address, right? Those are two most important things we need to interact with those to interact with contracts, and these are here. So whenever you run yarn deploy on Starknet Foundry package, this specific file will be written, overwritten. So we will have some, for example, previously I deployed on DevNet, so this file has already some contracts on DevNet. However, this is meant to be empty. And then when we deploy on Sepolia, it's going to come here and say we have some contracts on Sepolia as well. And we have a address and ABI, and also I think we have a class hash. Yeah, we use class hash just to display it on the UI, to show that this contract, for example, has a different implementation than another. But you only need these two if you want to interact with this contract. Then I think not much here. So I'm just going to explain first what is the usual developer flow that I have. The flow that I usually follow is I would develop my smart contracts on DevNet. I think you guys have been doing that on localhost already. Then I would switch my target. I would put my EMB in the Starknet Foundry. I will set up my EMB with my private key and my accounts in the networks that I'm targeting, let's say Sepolia or mainnet. I deploy the same way. So I just do the same contracts. I just deploy this, run the same command, but -- network Sepolia. And then I switch my scaffold config here. This is this file. I will switch it into the network that I deploy, and then I will test it again. So in an ideal scenario, everything that works on DevNet will work on Sepolia. So if you develop your app on DevNet, everything works, and then you just do the switch of yarn deploy network Sepolia, and then you switch this to Sepolia as well, the target network, it should work. That is the ideal scenario. Of course, there's a lot of constraints there. Like, for example, if you're interacting with a contract on mainnet or on DevNet or already existing contract, you might want to use something like a mainnet fork network. So this mainnet fork is an extra custom network that we built here that uses a DevNet with the chain ID of mainnet. As simple as that. And when you do yarn chain fork, is going to basically spin up a fork from mainnet. So you can interact with mainnet contracts on localhost and then switch into mainnet and deploy your contracts there. I think I do have another repo that has an implementation with forks and how to work with mainnet fork with the scaffold. If you guys are interested, you can reach out to me later and I will share that with you as well. I don't think we have enough bandwidth for today to do that. And also it uses ZK-Land, which was trained, I think, last month, 2 months ago. Okay, so let's go. Starknet Foundry. This one already finished. Okay, yes. Okay, so the first things first. Let's just set up our EMB. Okay, I'm not gonna show this, but I'm gonna set up my EMB right now. After this, I'm not gonna show my EMB anymore. I'm gonna put my mainnet private key. I'm gonna do that on the side. Okay. Okay, I already set up my EMB. Just to test it, I'm gonna try to do a yarn deploy network Sepolia.
Hi, Carlos, there's a question in the chat. They're asking, do you mean we should write the test ourselves after class?
The tests? What do you mean the tests? I think this is just continuing from the previous session. So I just updated the smart contract, the counter, so we can display some functionalities on the UI. So there is no tests, but the code is very simple. So you just need to follow along, maybe watch the recording, and you will be able to spin up your front end. I'm just testing right now that I set up my EMB correctly. So I just copied my EMB into my Foundry here, my EMB. I'm not gonna open it. And I put my mainnet and Sepolia private keys. So I'm gonna deploy right now. I'm trying to deploy to Sepolia.
Carlos, I think there's a student called Watsu. He's asking like the tests are failing.
Yeah, probably is because of I just updated the contract and I didn't update the tests. I just changed the contract source code just before the class. Yeah. But I think this is like basically when you deploy this app, what you're deploying is your client side, which is the Next.js app. That's like the link that people will be able to interact with. So we don't really mind about like the tests. Okay, this is it says function. Okay, let's try mainnet. Oh no, I'll put it in a different repo. Sorry. Put it in a different place. below XYZ packages. Okay, that should work. Also, it's very important to know that it's very important to follow the versions that we specify, at least in the scaffold, because for example, in the future, we are going to implement a bunch of very, very hardcore testing on a scaffold that is going to use Playwright to test that all the functionalities on the UI are working with very, very complicated smart contracts. So as you know, we have this debug UI that I showed before. We have this debug UI here. This debug UI, it basically you should be able to interact even with structs, very complex structures here. So we are building an end-to-end test with Playwright that will allow test that the connections with the wallets work, transactions work, so that because we have different dependencies and we must make sure that these dependencies are working correctly with each other before we upgrade into a new set of dependencies for building full stack applications. So that is the reason. And yeah, just make sure we are following the same versions. It's very slow today. Oh, okay, so it's deploying the contract. As you can see, deploy counter, and it deploy this address, and it's waiting to confirm that it's deployed properly, and then it's going to update this specific file here. So packages, Next.js contracts, deploy contracts. So it works. Right now, I just deployed to Sepolia, which means that it's okay. Just because we want to test first, we will, as I said before, we'll start developing first on DevNet, on localhost. So I'm just gonna, I think you guys already did this before, yarn chain, running the yarn chain here. So I'm gonna put this on the side. And then increase this font also. And then I'm gonna do yarn deploy. So yarn chain, yarn deploy, then yarn start. Those are the three basic commands that we have. This is on DevNet already, so I'm not passing any flag for Sepolia. Maybe just sharing also a bit about DevNet while it's loading. DevNet is a local host, basically a local host version. You will have a bunch of different accounts that are pre-deployed for you, and then they are also funded, I think, with 1,000 ETH, 1,000 Stark. For example, DevNet uses the same chain ID as Sepolia network. And here it's going to tell you like the addresses, but these details here, these addresses will be, I mean, until the last time that we checked, I think these are the same addresses as the ones on mainnet and Sepolia, so they keep the same. So they have a bunch of accounts, and these accounts are the ones we use for the burner wallet in Scaffold. These 10, I think like it's 5 accounts or 6. So I'm just gonna put this on the side. I deployed my contract already on DevNet, and then I'm gonna open a new one, a new terminal here. I'm gonna do yarn start. So I just did yarn deploy and yarn start after my yarn chain. So I have my UI running right now. It's import 3000. And this is not okay. It's very slow. So I'm opening my browser to check whether this is working right now. So we're gonna start from a simple structure in our UI that has some already written components, HTML code there, so we can do the hooks faster. A bunch of data. Okay, so we deploy our contract. This is how Scaffold-Stark looks like. This is our UI that I just wrote, and it has no functionalities, doesn't work. And let's explore a bit what is the debug contracts here. So in the debug contracts, we are able to see our contracts. This is the deploy contracts first, which is the counter that the one we just deployed now. And then we also have the pre-deploy contracts if and Stark. Now in the newer versions, these will not be available, just be Stark. And we can write. So we can, for example, come here and we can connect to our account. We choose one burner wallet, and then we can send a transaction, and it's gonna be updated on the site. It's instant, and then we will see those changes here. Now, this is how we use the debug contracts page of a Scaffold-Stark. It's very useful if you are developing contracts and you want to debug on a very user-friendly UI. Now, in the homepage, right? This is for smart contract developers when they want to test, but here for the front-end developers who want to launch their apps. So you want to have different buttons, functionalities using hooks, read from the contracts, something that looks better, right? So we have this preset already here. And the first thing we're gonna be doing is let's go for, let's first go to our main file that we're gonna be working on. So this is the file. So by now you should have the contract that is already changed to use the last version of the counter contract. And then you should also have this version of the app. So it's here, the app page. This is where we're gonna be working on. Okay, so the first thing is here, we're gonna be writing the target network. So we do have one of our hooks is use the target network because, as you know, we have our main file, which is scaffold-config.ts. So we wanna know if we want to reference this network that we already set up in our config file, we can do that. We can come here and do instant target network. Let me just import that. We will just be using it here. So this will basically give us the target network we are in right now. So let's wait until it's refreshing. Okay, now you can see there is a DevNet network. By the way, this size is okay, or because my screen is very big? Here is better.
Yes.
This is better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Now this specific component, I'm gonna show it to you here. It's the connected address. This is also a component that we did. So this component will tell you your address, and if you are in mainnet or Sepolia, it's also gonna tell you your Starknet ID. So for example, my Starknet ID is jrcarlos2000.stark. You will see it later when we deploy this to mainnet. You're able to click copy, and it has like a small icon, like it comes from a Starknet ID. In the future, you will see that. So we keep going. I think what the first thing we can do here will be the target network. Let's just start. I will name count. Let's get the counter value. So the counter value, we go to the contracts first. For example, this contract. We have a function called getCounter, right? It's this function here. We can reference this function using a hook of the Scaffold-Stark, which is the use read contract. So we go back to the app and put this here. Counter value. So what we're gonna be doing here is we basically are gonna take the data and put it as counter value. And I'm gonna use Scaffold read contract. So the user Scaffold read contract will receive two things. It needs the contract name and also the function name. So let's go for contract. We have the counter contract. And then we have the function name, which is the getCounter. We have already here, so we do that. Let's just remove this. Let's just do that. Zeros. Okay, I think this should be working. Let me see if it's pretty slow, definitely. It's pretty heavy. I'm gonna close a bunch of code that I have. Okay, now we have a counter. We have been interacting with this contract through the debug page, right? So if we go here, we can do a transaction on the counter. We can increase this and then go to the home. It's very slow. Awesome. It's taking too much. So soon. I'm closing some windows because I think it's very slow. Okay, so now we can see that it has a tree already increased. Let me see if I can refresh this. It's very slow. Okay. Now we have this here already. Now we can move into, let's check out the contract balance first. And to check out the contract balance right now of the price pool. So the price pool is the contract balance of the counter contract. So another hook that we have in a scaffold is called the use deploy contract info. So I think we have something like this, counter, and then we use deployed contract info. We're gonna use this specific name. So use deploy contract info is a very important hook in a scaffold. It's basically gonna let you use the name of the contract to get all the data from the contract. For example, the address, the API, the class hash, and other functionalities. And with this, why do we need this? Because we need to reference the balance of this contract. So we need to know what is this contract address so we can read. Okay, so then we will go into the Starknet part, Starknet Js. So the next thing is another read function, but now we are gonna be referencing another contract that we didn't deploy, but it's already existing there. And this is the Starknet contract. So as you can see, when I open contract name, Scaffold is gonna tell me which contracts I can choose from. So which contracts I have deployed. And these ETH and Stark are already deployed by default, but we just deploy the counter. So I'm gonna choose the Stark and I'm gonna use a function name. Okay, now it's better. Before it was very slow. So now, because it's better, it shows, as you can see, it's gonna show me a bunch of different options that where can I choose from, right? So for example, I am doing a balance of, right? So let me just do that. So I'm doing a balance of, and then the arguments that I'm gonna be passing is of course gonna be the counter contract address. Okay, just deploy contract info. You can see this. Okay, the contract info is gonna receive only counter. Okay. So basically, with this, we already can read the Starknet balance of our here contract balance. So we can just let me just put this value here. Contract balance, we can have it here. Okay. So right now, if I go back, basically this contract has nothing, but I can, let me see if this is deploying again. Okay. So what I can do is I can connect my wallet and let's see if this refreshes. So I go to debug contracts and I have a counter here. I'm gonna send it some Stark. So if I go to the Stark contract, I'm gonna write a transfer of 100 Stark. And I'm gonna click this button because this button is gonna append a bunch of zeros so that we have the decimals of this amount. So I send some Stark tokens. And now, as you can see, this has a very big amount, right? So right now, what I'm gonna do is, this big amount is basically the amount that we have with all the zeros. So it's not formatted. So the next thing we're gonna do is, let's just format this balance first. So counter value, control balance. It's just formatted balance. So this formatted balance, basically, if we have contract balance, we will just do and format it first to number. It's not very safe, but it's contract balance. And then we will do a division of n to the 18. And then we do to fixed. And let's do this to fixed to 6, probably. Otherwise, we just return 0. And then we just use this formatted balance here. let's see. Okay, so now we have just 100 Stark tokens. Now we need to implement more functionalities like the increment function and also the reset. Oh, also the reset tree has this formatted balance. So let's change that. Okay. So these are the very first hooks we're looking at. We're looking at scaffold read contract, the target network, and the deploy contract info. Moving forward, we will start doing the write contract and also the events. All right, I think just realized we missed one read function. So as you can see here, we have the winning number. As I mentioned earlier, we will have the winning number. So when we hit this number, the last person who calls the contract will receive all the Stark, or well, all the funds in here. So right now this is hard coded. Let's try to start the code. So it's number here. Okay, so we want to add the win number, and the win number right now is set to 10 in the contract. It's just a constant. It's hard coded there. But we need to read it either way. We need to, let's go here. And let's do another user scaffold read contract. So for this, we will use win number and use scaffold read contract. We're using the contract name again is the counter. And then the function name will be get wing number. So right now we have our wing number here. And then if we want to get the wing number, we will be able to just remove this here. Now let's do some safe stuff. So we have the wing number, otherwise 0. Yeah, just do some parsing to string. Right now it's reading the 10, right? So let's say we just want to change it. And this is why this is very useful. So you're working on your smart contract here. We have already sent some Stark, but what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna come to my counter contract, and I decided to change this to 5. So all I'm gonna do on the side on my terminal, it's going to be run yarn deploy again. So I'm running now yarn deploy again in the contracts. So this is running currently, and it's gonna be updated automatically on the UI. So let's wait a bit while it's loading. I'm running on the side. This is a terminal. Okay, so I finished running the redeployment. As you can see right now, it's 5, and everything is basically reset. So now we have 0 Stark on the contract. Now, the next functionality we want to do is I want to be able to send some Stark here when I increment. Okay, this function is not, so the increment function is not a function that is going to send tokens to the contract. However, we can do this in one transaction. And for this reason, we're going to be using the use scaffold multi-write, which is a hook that is going to allow us to send to multiple calls in one single transaction. So first of all, let's go and check out the input amount. So let's check out the input amount here. Let's just go and check out on the app here. So we have an input amount that we are setting, its state, and then we want to use this input amount to increment the contract. Now, we want to do this as there's 2 different functions here. So if we have, let's say, we input 0, then we just don't need to do a multi-call. We just need to call the increment function. But if we are if we input 10 as Stark, then we need to do two things. We need to transfer the Stark, and then we also need to call the increase function. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a handle increment function that is going to, it's basically gonna say that, okay, if the input amount is bigger than 0, I'm gonna execute one function, which is gonna be, let's say, increment with a Stark deposit. Okay, and then else just increment. So we need to write these two functions right now. We need to make sure that this is correctly done. Now let's just start with a simple one. So comment out this one also for now, and let's get our function. So the first function we're gonna do is the increment without sending a star. So I'm gonna do the send async, and I'm gonna call it increment counter. Use the scaffold. We use the write contract only, which is just one single function call, one single call. Again, we reference the contract. So the contract name is the counter, and we're gonna be using also the function name. So sometimes we might need to send some parameters or arguments, as well as in the read contract. Now, something very important here is that these hooks are already reading which functions are read and which functions are write functions on the contract. So when I am doing read contract, and if I open this here, it's gonna give me only the options that are for reading. And this is done by checking the state mutability of the functions on the ABI, right? So in this case, for example, when I did the function name and I'm on the write hook, then I'm just gonna be able to call the write functions on the contract. So in this case, there are a bunch of functions that are inherited from, I think, the ownable component. So it's these ones, the ones that have ownership. But these ones are the ones that we declare, right? Like the decrease counter, increase counter, reset counter. So in this case, we're just gonna increase the counter, and we're not gonna pass any parameters at all. And we're just gonna put it here. And then the input amount, let's see. So let's see here. Change the input amount. Let's just add it there. Just gonna put it here. So basically, I'm gonna handle the increment when I press the button. Let's see if this works. So I'm not connected. I connect to my burner wallet, and then I just launch a transaction, and I'm able to update the counter here. So the counter is updating. Now let's actually go until 5, right? Let's see if, so those 2, let's do 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it's good. Now, if there was some Stark, then we would be able to get those Stark, but there is no Stark. Okay, so now we went all the way more than the wing number. I'm just gonna reset the contract. So I'm gonna run on the side, yarn deploy again. So this goes back to 0 again. We can restart. Now, okay, we have done that. Now the next function that we're missing is the function that will send Stark and also will increase the counter. So it's the beginning is very similar. So we're gonna do send async, and we're gonna use this function name, and we're gonna use the use a scaffold multi-write contract. So something very interesting in Starknet, and you will not be able to see this in other chains, is that you're able to execute multiple calls in one transaction. And this is very cool because it brings another level of user experience. So instead of you approving tokens first and then executing a transaction, you can do everything in just one. So for this one, we will need a bunch of calls. So each of these calls is going to be composed by these. So it looks the same, but it's just an array of calls. It looks the same as the scaffold write contract. So we will start by sending some Stark, right? And we need to send some Stark to the counter contract. So we need to know the counter contract address, but we already have it because we used it here to get the contract balance before, right? So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna call the function name. I'm gonna do transfer. And the arguments usually for a transfer will be the contract address and the amount, right? So I have the counter, the address, and I need to send the amount. Now the amount, as you see, the amount is just a number, but we need to basically parse it into a different, like with all the decimals that we need to, it needs to receive, right? So I'm just gonna do this int input amount, and I need to convert this. So number, first number, dot. And after I execute this function, I need to do the increment function. So I can just copy this part here. Okay. So right now we are doing two transactions. We are sending Stark to the counter address with the input amount. And then we are also doing the increase counter function. Now we just add it here to our wrapper function, and we should be able to execute this. Let's see. So if I do 10, okay, now if I do 10, I am able to send some tokens to the contract, and now the contract has a different price pool, right? So let's actually go until 5 again, and let's see if we are able to reach and drain these tokens when we reach 5. So after you reach 5, based on the contract logic, the caller will receive all the price pool of the contract. So now this is 0. And this is working well. The only missing piece is 2 things. We're gonna do the reset, which is another use send transaction, but we also need to do the events here. So I'm gonna check the time. Let me check so we can do this part. Okay, let's try to do the events. I think the events is a bit more important first. So this piece of code is already there. We just need to declare these function events. Okay, so these events, we have a custom hook that we built that is the use scaffold event history. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read the data as events, and we're going to use a scaffold event history. So again, it's going to receive a contract name. So the contract from which we will get those events from, right? So in this case, we're listening from the counter, and then it's going to ask us for our event name. Now we have a bunch of different options here. As again, these options are also inherited from the component ownable from OpenZeppelin, but these first ones are the ones that we declared on the contract. So in this case, let's just use the increased, and let's say we want to do from block 0 because we are in the DevNet. So DevNet start from block 0. Now let's do this. Okay, and let's do also watch. So I'm just gonna uncomment this part. As you can see, we have the events right now. So this user is sending increment events to the is emitting some events through the contract. And what I'm gonna do now is I am gonna change this. So this part is starting from block 0, but when we are doing this on mainnet or on Sepolia, we have too many blocks, right? So the maximum amount of chunk size that we can bring on one call might be 1,000. So we basically cannot fetch all this from 0 block and block developing on a live. So what we can do in this case, we want to fetch the last few blocks or the last 50 blocks.
Hey, Carlos, I think
if we
you're
are in
breaking.
Sepolia.
I think you're breaking up a bit. Like
It's
your voice.
my headphones or
I think it's the
my
network.
headphones are.
Now you're
Oh, the
good.
network.
But like the previous
Yeah, I
sentence.
just saw that. I just saw that my network's unstable. Okay, that's weird. All right, just let me know when it cuts so I can repeat. Okay.
Yeah, now you're good.
Okay, so I was saying that the front block when we are developing on a live network like Sepolia or mainnet, we usually don't put 0 because we cannot fetch all the events unless we are building an indexer. So that's another topic.
Hello, Carlos. Can you also collapse your Explorer, like your file Explorer, like Command B, so that it's kind of like clear your code? Yeah, just
Okay. All right. Great. Good point. Okay, so okay, again, so if we are in a live network, we don't want to fetch from the event 0. We want, sorry, from the block 0. We want to do just a few blocks, unless we are building an indexer, but that's like another thing to do. And then to get, for example, for us to get the last 50 blocks, we need to know which block we're in right now. So for that one, we will use a Starknet React hook. And this hook is block is use block number from Starknet React. So we are able to basically fetch the latest block. Let's use this, just this one. We are able to fetch the latest block here using this hook from Starknet React. And we are gonna be doing just the last 50. But let's do this. So if this is, so if this last like block number is greater than 50, then we will do this. Just fetch the last 50 blocks. Otherwise, we just fetch 0, like if we are indefinite. Okay, so the next thing we will be doing is just displaying these events. This function doesn't have anything working, the reset, so it's not set up yet. However, we can go ahead and do a deployment on Sepolia. Let's start from Sepolia first. So I'm gonna bring my my terminal here. In my terminal, I'm gonna do yarn deploy network Sepolia. And I'm gonna wait a bit until we have it. And then the other thing I'm gonna do is I am going to change my scaffold config. As I said, this is the most important file for our app. So I'm gonna just switch this to Sepolia. Now, when I switch this to Sepolia, and the contracts are not deployed yet, this now it's deployed. Okay. So it's deploying in Sepolia. As you can see, I just did yarn deploy -- network Sepolia, and I just need to wait. So now it's executed. I refresh my app, refresh here, and I go on Sepolia. So now my network, as you can see, is on Sepolia testnet here, and I don't have a wallet connected. So I'm gonna connect my wallet. I use Bravos, and I am going to change to Sepolia. Let me change my wallet network to Sepolia. So right now I'm in Sepolia. And I am connected with this address, and I can also say in some Stark. Can you see the wallet pop up on the right side?
Yes.
Or not?
A
Okay.
bit small.
So okay, yeah, it's very small. Okay. So I'm just sending a transaction right now in Sepolia. I didn't change any of my contract code. I didn't change my app code. The only thing I changed was the scaffold config, which was this file here. And I changed also, I deployed here. I deployed to network Sepolia. And now I'm doing a transaction on Sepolia. Okay, so let's wait until this transaction is successful. Okay, now my contract has 1 Stark and also 1 out of 5 for the counter. Okay, now let's wait. The events will be appearing also very soon. The next thing we will be doing, it's sending this to mainnet. So after we have developed our MVP or application on Sepolia, after DevNet, we test on Sepolia. As you can see right now, there is the event here. We want to move into mainnet. So I'm just gonna do yarn deploy network mainnet. And after this, again, I just have to go to the scaffold config file here and change my target network to mainnet. When I change my target network to mainnet, and as you can see here, it was red on the right side when I was just deploying before. Okay, so now I am here. Let's see if it's already updated. So I just deployed my application to mainnet. Okay. Now what I'm gonna do is just refresh the app. And I need to change also my wallet again. So I was before on Sepolia. Now I'm gonna change to mainnet. Now I am connected. So as you can see right now, my connected wallet, it will show me my Starknet ID here. So this is the component that we have, as I shared before, is the connected address component. And it shows not my address, but it shows my JR Carlos 2000 at the Stark, which is my Starknet ID, and also my profile picture. So again, I can just do, maybe I'm just gonna set 1 Stark, or maybe less, 0.1. All right, let's just send 1 Stark. This is, okay, is this incorrectly? Just remove these files. Contracts, Sepolia. Oops, it just didn't deploy. Let's redeploy again. It seems like it didn't update on the UI. Also, when you are deploying, you should make sure that you have enough funds on your wallet that you're using to deploy, because probably sometimes when the transactions it doesn't execute because of the fee was very low. Okay, so I think, yeah, this happens sometimes when the network is a bit, the fee goes up and down and it's a bit congested, so it's not gonna be able to deploy to mainnet. Let's try again. One more. Always in the live coding, the mainnet fails. The last one. Anyway, let's see if time works. not deploy. Okay, let's just stick to Sepolia first for now, and then we can try in a while. So after you are done with your app, let's say you are on Sepolia or on mainnet, then you want to deploy your app to Vercel and share with your friends. So what we have is a simple command, like it's called yarn Vercel. You can do yarn Vercel, or you can do yarn Vercel YOLO if you just want to skip a bunch of build issues. So you just do yarn Vercel YOLO production, and then we're able to deploy these. So it's going to ask me a few questions. Yes, yes, no, no. Sample Basecamp 12. It's going to upload. All right, so I just deployed the contracts on mainnet, and they worked. The transaction went through. And I'm just going to change my target network to mainnet. And also the deployment on Vercel already worked. So we have our Vercel app here. It was loading, and then it's here. So we can already access it if we click this link. I can share this in a while. So this is a live app that you can already share with your friends, and you can connect on basically on, I think this is on Sepolia testnet. So I'm going to change to Sepolia. Okay, so I can do transactions on Sepolia, connect my wallet, and do many things. Now, what I'm going to do now is first I just changed this to mainnet because I just deployed to mainnet. The contracts were on mainnet already. All good. I am going to deploy this again. So I'm just going to do the same. And while this is loading, I am going to reply the question. I think someone asked about building on the fork. So you want to build on the fork when you want to interact with a bunch of contracts that are already existing on mainnet. Let's say you are building a protocol that wants to integrate with a Kubo or CK-Land or other protocols in Starknet. You might want to fork the chain, so like the actual state of the network right now, so that you have all these existing contracts you can interact with. So you build on top of that. Now in a scaffold, there's two things to take care of when you're developing on a mainnet fork. And this should be somewhere here. Let's see. Recipes. Developing on a fork. So in recipes, you go to developing on a fork. It's going to teach you how to develop on a fork. So you will need to do yarn chain fork network and put an RPC that you're forking from. And you will be able to basically run like a devnet in locally. But something very important here is that basically if you're fetching events, you will have to fetch at least from the event after the one that it fetched. So you need to make sure that you're doing the latest block on the fork +1 if you're fetching events. And because it's basically not going to give you all the history that existed before. However, it's going to give you the contract states, all the states that are already existing on mainnet. And then in the scaffold config side, you will need to use mainnet fork. And the reason to do this is because as you can see before, when I showed at the beginning when we did yarn chain, it has the chain ID of Sepolia, but we actually need the chain ID of mainnet. When we do the yarn chain with fork, it's gonna set the chain ID to the one from mainnet. So there will be some problems there if you want to use like DevNet Sepolia. It's just different. So for that reason, we just basically built another version of DevNet that has a chain ID of mainnet. Okay, so that is the mainnet fork. And then of course in your EMB, if you want to set up a public provider, you can just use this like your local host. But this is already set up. This is optional. And then you will be able to, as you can see, there's many steps here, how you can set up your wallet, so your extension wallet to work with your Starknet fork, right? So you will need to do the setup here. Just go to the docs and you will see all the the steps to follow so you can build on forks and integrate with existing contracts. Now let's see if this already worked. So if I go to my sample website, now this should be on mainnet. And I'm gonna go back to mainnet. And I'm gonna connect here. Okay, so now I'm with JR Carlos Stark. I'm gonna send maybe 10 Stark. So I'm gonna send 10 Stark to this contract, and the one who can increment it to 5 will basically receive all this. So I send a transaction and it's successful. This is already on mainnet. You can just wait a bit. Show the number here, 1 out of 5, and it has 10 Stark in this contract that are locked. So the one who goes and click this, it's just gonna get the 10 Stark, unless you wanna implement this later and have to reset and send some tokens. Let me share that on the chat. Right, I think that's pretty much it for today's workshop. I hope you guys like. See my screen. Okay, I hope you guys like the workshop, and any questions that you guys have, you can just come to the website of the Scaffold here, and you can join us on Telegram. So there is a developers chat on Telegram. You can ask questions there. You can find some bugs. There's a bunch of very huge updates that are coming, and this is not only on Scaffold, but in general in Starknet. There is a bunch of new updates on Starknet JS, new RPC versions, a lot of things coming. So stay tuned. We are gonna be launching a lot of also very cool stuff on like testing, E2E testing for the whole framework. And any requests, you can do them on join Telegram. And anything that you want to learn from, like again, speedrun Stark or the documentation.